kembali tentunya masih di Capital Market Summit and Expo 2022. Oke, bersama kita akustik tentunya hari ini di hari yang kedua. Tentunya para hadirin CMSE 2022 di seluruh Indonesia dan dimanapun Anda berada tentunya. Semoga menikmati lagu-lagu yang akan kita berikan tentunya pada hari ini. Kita akustik. Kau datang dan jantungku berdegup kencang. Kau buatku terbang melayang. Tiadaku sangka getaran ini ada saat jumpa yang pertama. Mataku tak dapat terlepas darimu. Perhatikan setiap tingkahmu. Tertawa pada setiap candamu saat jumpa yang pertama. Could it be love? Could it be love? Could it be? Could it be? Could it be love? Could it be love? Could it be love? Could it be something that I never had? Could it be love? Mataku tak dapat terlepas darimu. Perhatikan setiap tingkahmu. Tertawa pada setiap candamu.
Hello everyone, a very good morning to all of you. I am Valentina Simon, and as the MC for this webinar, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Capital Market Summit and Expo 2022, the event that brings together thousands of capital market participants, the place where you can get the latest information on the current capital markets development happening in Indonesia and around the globe. Ladies and gentlemen, on yesterday's event's opening ceremony, Minister Erlangga stated that global economic condition is facing a perfect storm that brings uncertainties and challenges. Many countries are having a slowdown and even contraction in their economy, as well as facing inflation pressures. So how should Indonesia adapt and navigate in these global economic challenges? And how our financial sectors can become enablers for economic growth? This will be discussed in the first webinar of today with the topic Strengthening Indonesia Economic Resiliency in Facing Global Dynamics. The webinar will start with an opening speech from the Financial Services Authority, or OJK, followed by presentation from our two prominent speakers coming from ADB and McKinsey & Company, and before we end it with a Q&A session. Viewers can also join the discussion by sending your comments or questions through the Q&A menu. So first, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome our distinguished speakers. First, Chief Executive of Capital Market Supervisor, Financial Services Authority, Mr. Inarno Jayadi. Country Director of Asian Development Bank, ADB, Indonesia, Mr. Jiro Tominaga. Senior Partner, Head of Financial Services for Asian of McKinsey & Company, Mr. Jom Degante, and our moderator, Business Development Advisor of Indonesia Stock Exchange, Mr. Poltak Hotradero. Without further ado, let's start today's webinar with an opening speech from the Chief Executive of Capital Market Supervisor, Financial Services Authority. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Inarno Jayadi.
Thank you, Valentina. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning and best wishes to all of us Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Shalom. The Honorables, Deputy Commissioners, and colleagues from OJK, colleagues, Director of SRO and subsidiaries, distinguished speakers, Mr. Guillaume Degante, Senior Partner and Head of Financial Services for Asian McKinsey and Company, and Mr. Jiro Tominaga, Country Director of Asian Development Bank in Indonesia, association managers and all colleagues in capital market industry, members of press, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. First of all, we praise the God Almighty for the blessings and grace bestowed upon us that allow all of us to gather this morning at this international seminar as part of Capital Market Summit and Expo 2022 event series to celebrate the 45th anniversary of Indonesia capital market reactivations. I would like to express our highest gratitude and appreciation to the organizing committee of the 45th anniversary of the Indonesian capital market reactivation, namely the IDX, the KSEI, and the KPEI, for organizing Capital Market Summit and Expo 2022 events with OJK, including today's international seminar. This seminar will raise an interesting topic related to the efforts needed to strengthen Indonesia's economic resilience in addressing the global challenges going forward. We are delighted to welcome our distinguished speaker with us, Mr. Guillaume Degante and Mr. Jiro Tominaga. Through synergy, collaboration, and close cooperation among us, we are very assured that the world, and particularly Indonesia, will strive from economic turmoil, including to the threat of recession and the risk of global stagflation. My optimism is based on the fact that we have managed to overcome a great challenge of the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, we realize that the current global economic state is filled with uncertainty. While striving with challenges from the COVID-19 pandemic, countries around the world are also faced with the emergence of new risks that are far complex than before. Geopolitical tensions have led to wars and supply chain disruption that have caused soaring prices of various commodities. However, in the midst of increasing global financial market volatility with potential spillover to domestic financial markets, the government is still optimistic with Indonesia economic growth that remain intact and still grew by 5% for the last 3 quarters consecutively. Therefore, in order to maintain the momentum of national economic recovery, OJK always proactively and collaboratively issued various policies that support the Indonesia government effort in maintaining and encouraging the domestic economic stability. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, in relation to the economic performance of a country, the capital market is an integral part that should be taken into account as one of indicators to measure overall endurance and strength of its economy. The Indonesian capital market industry has continued to record positive growth in the last 45 years. In fact, currently, the Indonesian capital market is still considered as fairly large market and very attractive to both domestic and foreign investors. The Indonesian capital market has demonstrated remarkable positive performance as indicated by several indicators. As of October 10, 2022, the GCI has reached 6,994 points, or increased by 6.27% year to date. GCI's new all-time high record was reached on September 13, 2022 at the level of 7,318. Likewise, Indonesia market capitalization accounted for around 9,200 trillion, or increased by 11.38% year to date. In terms of fundraising, we also noted that around of 179.66 trillion rupiah has been raised through capital market with 48 new issuers. Until today, there are a dozen more companies that are planning to conduct initial public offerings. Additionally, the number of investors continues to grow every year. Currently, the number of capital market investors has reached 9.8 million, with dominated by investor under 30 years that comprises about 59.22% of total investors. It is a good sign for Indonesia economic sector since it shows that financial literacy has been developed at such an early age. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, as a big nation with the abundance of qualified resources, Indonesia has unique economic characteristic compared to other countries, which provides opportunities for Indonesia economic growth going forward that includes effective pandemic handling of rapid economic recovery, sustainable growth of domestic supply and demand, which support the national economy, moderately rapid digital transformation of the financial service sector, new engine of economic growth from micro, small, medium enterprises, MSMEs, that provide loads of job opportunities, which also export-oriented and environmentally friendly. OJK is highly committed to encourage the development of MSMEs through its various accommodative policies. The green economy development, according to the government policies on the climate change, OJK also continues to support the government in implementation of the carbon trading. We hope that the capital market industry could optimize those uniqueness of Indonesia and further promoting Indonesia as the center of economic growth and stability in Asia that will entice both domestic and international investors to invest in Indonesia. As OJK's effort to seize this opportunity, OJK continues to issue and implement policy aimed to accelerating the market deepening, while at the same time increasing investor confidence that include providing relaxation policy for capital market industry to maintain stability and volatility due to the impact of the global economic uncertainty. Undertaking continuous public gathering to increase the awareness to harness the capital market as an alternative source of funding for business. Issuing regulation to facilitate companies in conducting IPOs and also supporting the development of MSMEs through securities crowdfunding platform, and also accelerating the use of financial technology to expand the marketing network of investment products. These policies are expected could help to enhance market resilience in mitigating the impact of the global economy and geopolitics. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, finally, again, we would like to express our deepest gratitude to our speakers, Mr. Guillaume de Gantes and Mr. Jiro Tominaga, for your support to this event, and also to all participants in this seminar from across the world. We hope that the next discussion session will run smoothly and may enrich the understanding of all stakeholders and the public about the capital market strategic role to the economy of Indonesia. Thank you and welcome to the seminar. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Pak Inarno. It's very optimistic opening. We need that. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before we move on to the next part, I would like to invite all the speakers and participants in the panelist room for a group photo. The picture will be taken in 2 sessions, so everybody make sure your camera is on. Here we go for the first session. Ready? Don't forget to smile. 1, 2, 3. Okay, the second session. 1, 2, 3. Great. Thank you, everybody. And once again, thank you, Pak Inarno, for the opening speech. Ladies and gentlemen, next is presentation from speakers and discussion on strengthening Indonesia's economic resiliency in facing global dynamics. The discussion will be moderated by Pak Poltak Kotradero, who is a business development advisor in IDX. Pak Poltak, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you, Valentina. Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first seminar on the second days of Capital Market Summit and Expo 2022. For the first occasion, we'll have Mr. Jiro Tominaga from Asian Development Bank will present us with a description, outlook, and the current development around the world, especially about emerging countries and also in Asia, and also about Indonesia, on how mitigating the current turbulence or headwind in a global scale. Let me introduce you Mr. Jiro Tominaga. Mr. Jiro Tominaga is the Asian Development Bank Country Director for Indonesia. He is responsible for ADB country strategy, operation, and relationship in Indonesia, and has assumed position in September 2021. Mr. Tominaga has 30 years experience, professional experience, including 7 years with the Asian Development Bank. So I think we have a prominent speaker here, and then shall proceed with Mr. Tominaga. Mr. Tominaga, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to speak in this very important capital market seminar in Expo 2022. And also, I would like to thank Inarno for a very optimistic opening remarks. So today, as my initial contribution to the discussion, I would like to start by sharing with you how we see how we ADB sees the economic outlook for Asia and the Pacific, as well as for Indonesia for this year and the next. Then I would like to talk a little bit about the critical issue of expanding sustainable finance in our region and how ourselves, ADB, is engaging in that space. So if I could ask, yes, thank you very much. Maybe we can go to the next slide, please. So I'd like to start from the key messages of the latest outlook that we issued in September. In the past 6 months or so, various headwinds have strengthened. First, Russia's continued invasion of Ukraine has raised uncertainty and unsettled commodity markets. The resulting supply disruptions and elevated food and energy prices are contributing to the inflationary pressures globally. Second, in response to higher inflation, aggressive tightening by the US Federal Reserve, the ECB, and other central banks is weakening global demand and rattling financial markets. And third, lockdowns in the People's Republic of China under its zero COVID policy threaten growth and supply chains. So as a result, our latest growth forecast revised down relative to our forecast in Asian Development Outlook, or ADO, issued in April, revised downwards from 5.2% to 4.3% in 2022, and from 5.3 to 4.9% in 2023. A noteworthy point is that the regional inflation forecast is raised from 3.7 to 4.5 for this year, and from 3.1 to 4.0 for next year. So the outlook is also clouded by significant downside risks this time, including a sharp deceleration in global growth, stronger than expected monetary policy tightening, escalation of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, deeper than expected deceleration in the People's Republic of China, and negative pandemic developments. So let me now walk you through those points in detail. The next slide, please. So first, inflation. So inflation in developing Asia, shown in the black line in the left-hand side chart, increased from 3.0% in January to 5.3% in July, while it rose above the pre-pandemic 5-year average of 2.8% over 2015 and 2019. It remained below rates experienced by advanced economies such as the US, which is the dashed line, and Euro area, which is the dotted line. So there are significant differences across sub-regions in Asia. The Caucasus and Central Asia, shown in the orange line, had the highest inflation rate in July at 13.5%, whereas inflation in East Asia stood at just 3.0%. So even these sub-regional figures hide differences across economies due to domestic drivers, including, for example, very high inflation in Sri Lanka, driven by supply disruptions and foreign currency shortages, fuel subsidy withdrawals in Pakistan, currency depreciation in Lao PDR. So these are shown in the right-hand side table. I'm sorry, these are very, very small fonts, but they are shown in the table on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. So what's driving the inflation? So as shown in this chart, which includes economies with available monthly CPI and item weights data, food prices and energy prices have been the main contributors to the rise in inflation in the region this year, as you may have expected. For developing Asia as a whole, which is shown in the leftmost bar, food inflation contributed 1.4 percentage points, energy inflation 1.6 percentage points, while 1.1 percentage points were added by other items. For high inflation economies such as Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Myanmar, food prices were the main inflation driver, but energy prices also contributed significantly to inflation. Next slide, please. So despite the slowing recovery, inflation is still projected to be higher than the forecast in April, or higher on higher fuel and food prices. The left-hand side chart shows that the forecast of regional inflation this year is raised from 3.7% in the April projection to 4.5% in the most latest one, and from 3.1 to 4.0 for 2023. So the headline inflation is projected to accelerate in all sub-regions in Asia, although more gradually in East Asia and the Pacific, and substantially faster in South Asia and the Caucasus and Central Asia. The forecasts for South Asia are revised up from the ADO projection in April to 8.1% for 2022 and 7.4% for 2023, mainly reflecting large changes in inflation in India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. So surges in global commodity prices have pushed up prices in these economies. Next slide, please. So turning to policy, monetary policy tightening has accelerated as central banks in the region hiked rates to curb inflation and safeguards financial stability. So following 14 rate increases in the first quarter, there were 15 rate hikes in the second quarter, and another 14 in July and August in our region. Some central banks tightened aggressively to address concerns over debt-related macroeconomic vulnerabilities. From April to August, policy rates, for example, in Sri Lanka and Pakistan rose by 800 basis points and 525 basis points, respectively. Please note that this only includes the rate change up to August, so Indonesia's recent change is not included in the chart. So with continued price pressures and since real interest rates remain low or negative in many economies, monetary authorities in the region may have to further tighten policy to keep inflation in check and prevent possible capital outflows. Next slide, please. So on this one, we looked into the possible quantitative impact of some of these risks. One potential possible downside scenario considered in our simulation is more aggressive than expected monetary tightening in the US and other advanced economies triggered by sustained inflationary pressures. So in this scenario, business and household sentiments deteriorates and global equity prices plummet, plunging advanced economies into recession in 2023. Developing Asia would also be affected mainly through a fall in external demand. Quantitative assessment of the economic impact suggests that growth in the region will be 1.3 percentage points lower than the baseline in 2023. Outward-oriented economies in East Asia would be especially affected by the dampened export prospects because of the global growth slowdown and lower oil prices. Inflation, although unwinds and would be about 0.3 percentage points below the baseline next year. So going forward, central banks in the region should tread a very, very careful path to navigate the challenging outlook. Next slide, please. So in terms of projected global growth, softening global demand will shape the region's outlook. Growth forecasts for major advanced economies are adjusted downward this time to 1.9% in 2022 and to 1% in 2023. Growth will slow sharply in the US, and we expect the Eurozone to contract and go into recession in the last 2 quarters of this year. Euro area projections have been downgraded to 2.5% in 2022 and 0.7% in 2023. Brent crude prices will remain elevated this year, averaging $106 per barrel, or about 50% higher than in 2021, but will ease to about $95 per barrel in 2023 as global demand weakens. The forecast for headline inflation in major advanced economies is substantially adjusted upward this time, averaging 7.2% in 2022 from the 4.8% projected in April, before easing to 3.0% next year. Next slide, please. So turning to the regional outlook in Asia and Pacific, growth in developing Asia is expected to weaken. GDP growth forecasts for the region are revised down from 5.2 to 4.3 in 2022 and from 5.3 to 4.9 next year. So downgrades in growth forecasts for the People's Republic of China weigh heavily on the regional projections. Growth in developing Asia, excluding the People's Republic of China, is forecast at 5.3% in both 2022 and 2023. This is actually the first time in more than 3 decades that the rest of developing Asia is growing faster than the People's Republic of China. So across sub-regions, the biggest downward revision is in East Asia, as due to China's slower growth. Growth momentum in South Asia will also weaken due to slightly slower growth in India and a large expected contraction in Sri Lanka. Forecasts are revised up slightly for Caucasus and Central Asia and the Pacific and Southeast Asia, where Indonesia is. The forecasts remain largely unchanged. So as regards inflation, the regional inflation forecast has been raised from 3.7 to 4.5% this year and from 3.1 to 4.0 next year. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So turning your attention to Indonesia. The picture is more positive than that of the global or regional outlook. Indonesia has been on a solid recovery path from COVID-19 pandemic. The big uncertainty for Indonesia at the time of the previous projection in April was the potential surge of Omicron variant, the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the overall global economic volatility. Since then, as you know, COVID-19 has been more or less contained and the domestic demand remained robust. On the export front, strong demand for and high prices of Indonesian commodity exports boosted the export in value and volume. In the meantime, revenue windfall enabled larger subsidies and smaller deficit. So overall, Indonesia seems to have a strong momentum through the rest of 2022. There are downside risks in inflation and global growth, but they won't be really felt until early next year. So for this year, higher growth, higher current account surplus, higher inflation from the April ADO level, projected level, is now projected in update. For next year, we see more moderate growth, lower current account deficit, and higher inflation. Next slide, please. So overall, developing Asia's outlook comes with the significant downside risk. Deceleration in global growth would severely undermine the demand for developing Asia's exports. Aggressive tightening could result in sharp exchange rate depreciations, raising the cost of servicing external debt, financial instability, imbalance of payments difficulties in economies with more vulnerable fundamentals. It could also depress economic activity further if central banks in the region follow suit with rate hikes. Hikes in global commodity prices could further increase inflationary pressures and lead to slower growth in the region. A deeper than expected deceleration in the People's Republic of China would impact the region's growth outlook, especially those that are closely linked to the supply chains. The emergency of new COVID-19 variants still remains as a risk. Other risks that require close monitoring include high public debt in some economies and related fragilities, food insecurity, geopolitical tensions, and climate change-related disruptions. These are the risks that we need to monitor. Next slide, please. Now, I'd like to talk briefly about securing financing for sustainable development goals and ADB's role in that space. So Indonesia's SDG financing gap up to 2030 is estimated to be approximately $1 trillion. It is clear that public resources through national budget alone will not be sufficient, although it is very important. It is critical to leverage on private sector financing and attract international investments through the capital market. So, to help this transition to this effort, ADB has supported regional initiatives on sustainable finance, among others, through the ASEAN Capital Market Forum, for which OJK is a member of. ADB supported the development of the ASEAN Green, Social, and Sustainable Bond Standards. ADB is also supporting ACMF, the ASEAN Capital Market Forum, to develop ASEAN sustainability-linked bond standards and ASEAN transition bond standards. Through the ASEAN Plus 3 process, ADB supported raising awareness and capacity building of regulators and issuers on the importance of sustainable finance. ADB also is supporting PEFINDO to be an accredited international verified based on climate bond initiative standards. As of November 2021, Indonesia's green, social, and sustainability bond market stood at $7.7 billion, with green consisting of $6.3 billion and 13 issuances in total. From these 13, the split between sovereign and corporate issuance is 7 and 6. Note, however, that most of the green corporate issuances were in 2018. No green corporate issuances done in 2021. The last corporate issuances were in October 2020 by Star Energy Geothermal. So the drying up of corporate issuances is possibly and likely due to a combination of high regulatory costs without equivalent financial benefit. So ADB is supporting OJK to review the green bond regulations to map against international standards and potentially make them more market friendly. Next slide, please. So the final 3 slides are about the regional initiative called the Energy Transition Mechanism, or ETM. The ETM is a blended finance platform that was launched at COP26 in November 2021 in Glasgow by Minister Sri Mulyani and Secretary Dominguez, the Philippine Secretary for Finance at the time, and ADB President Masatsugu Asakawa, with the goal of decarbonizing the energy mix. So the ETM is intended to help solve one of our region's biggest problems, retiring coal-fired power plants faster while continuing to support the deployment of renewables and other clean energy technologies. So the ETM aims to accelerate the path from coal to clean energy by utilizing public and private finance for early retirement or repurposing of coal-fired power plants while supporting investment in clean energy. Next slide, please. So there's sometimes a question about why we need to invest in retiring or repurposing coal-fired power plants as opposed to just investing in building renewable energy. So I think there are a few advantages to this approach to be combined with the development of, the renewable energy and clean technologies. First is that coal phase out is really critical in terms of greenhouse gas emission reduction in our region. Hypothetically, if 50% of the coal power plants were retired or repurposed over the next 10 to 15 years in Indonesia, the Philippines, and Vietnam, we will remove 200 million tons of CO2 emission per year. This is equivalent to 61 million cars, the current conventional gasoline engine, combustion engine car off the road. But secondly, in a country like Indonesia, where excess supply situation exists in major parts of the power grid, phase out of coal would create space and demand for renewable development. Next slide, please. So this is the final slide. I just want to mention that to be successful and sustainable, this ETM initiative cannot be done in isolation. The initiatives we're supporting will be delivered in a manner that addresses 4 Ps, people, power, and policy, built on the foundation of strong partnerships between governments, the private sector, and civil society. It will be integrated in the overall energy transition policy and roadmap of the country so that they are not ad hoc transactions and ensure that the just transitions for workers and communities are taken care of. So it also involves donor countries, financial institutions, and philanthropies. The initiative have been initially rolled out in the Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam with expectation to scale to other countries. In Indonesia, I guess I would say that the work is most advanced, the energy transition being one of the priorities of Indonesia's G20 presidency is also providing the impetus to the work. So ADB is working very closely with the government of Indonesia to roll out this initiative, starting from a few cases first as pilot and scaling, hoping to start out as a few cases as pilot and scale up over the medium term. So we are committed to continue supporting the government's efforts for energy transition. So I think I have spoken quite long already, so let me stop here. I'm very much looking forward to discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tominaga. It's a very interesting presentation. I've made some notes here that Indonesia is in good condition due to some of the strength, while other countries got some problem with the external demands. We also identified that ADB is a main sponsor and development of the bond market in Asia, which I think we really appreciate. But then again, from your perspective, it is my question is about what's the main strength of Indonesian economy that can make it sustain up to the only minor downgrade for the next year, because most of Indonesian economy driven by private consumption. So in your opinion, what we should do with the private consumption in order to make it as a main strength of Indonesian economy?
Well, thank you very much. I think it's a very important question. I think I think we do look at Indonesia in a relatively robust sort of situation right now compared to the challenges that other countries are facing. I think first, I mean, inflation has increased. It's there as I mentioned, is a downside sort of the risk. But right now, it is remaining below in a manageable situation right now. I think one of the strengths, I think, would say it's the macroeconomic policy management capability that both the Ministry of Finance and also the Bank of Indonesia on the both monetary and fiscal side, I think they are dealing with this situation very appropriately. And then also in terms of the tightening of monetary policy that has been taking place, we think is an appropriate measures at this particular point in time. And then also, I also know that the central bank seems to be doing an operation twist, setting short short-term bonds and supporting long-term bonds. It is flattening the yield curve. Raising short-term rates will help to contain inflation, while capping long-term rates will help sustain investment and growth. I also see a strong sort of commitment from the government side on the returning to 3% deficit ceiling, which is on track. So, and then also fiscal condition is appropriate. The fiscal framework of deficit, keeping the deficit ceiling of 3% of GDP, debt ceiling of 60%, has served Indonesia well in the past, and returning to it from the COVID sort of emergency response situation to return into that state will bolster policy credibility. Fiscal tightening will also help reduce inflationary pressures, which is the very big downside risk that Indonesia is facing. So I think in both policy terms, I think it's also it's a very strong point that Indonesia has at this particular point in time.
Okay, so I think I can summarize that maintaining buying power of the people is the key for maintaining the economy. I think you mentioned about inflation control, so I think something has been basic recipe for strengthening the buying power of the society. But then again, of course, the current situation a bit unprecedented. In developed countries, inflation is still as a big issue, as we saw this even in US or in UK, for example, the inflation has been in a record of 30 years, 40 years, and even European countries got a serious problem with that. So what's your outlook on the general inflation, and where will be the hotspot, or maybe on dealing with the inflation, where most countries will fail or will succeed?
Well, in Indonesia, I think inflation remained below 4% through May. Price pressures were muted because of the pickup in economic activity was modest at that time, and inflation expectations were anchored, and exchange rate was broadly stable. So, and also the government used the price controls, export bans to some extent, and subsidies to contain inflation. But the inflation started rising in June and August and shooting up due to fuel price hikes. It went up from 4.91% in August, and then 5.95, about 6% in September. It will likely to be about 6% maybe by December, and to remain close to 7 through mid-2023 before tapering to about 3% by end 2023. But because supply shocks have driven inflation, I think we're saying that it's probably unlikely to accelerate, although the recovery has been healthy. The economy still has below its full potential, so inflation expectation would be contained. That would be our view at this particular point in time.
Okay, thank you. Well, in the case of Indonesia, the inflation has been triggered because of the increase of fuel price. Well, I think I agreed, and then, as you mentioned, that next year the fuel prices still uphold the position of the higher than normal condition. So I think it's a very good view of Indonesia. But then maybe for the rest of ASEAN, as we also saw, there are some problems with the countries like Laos, for example, or maybe some part of Asia. So, in your opinion, how the best government can deal with this kind of headwind, especially in a country like those in Laos or Sri Lanka or other countries that in next year will still have a huge pressure on economic development?
Well, I would probably, refrain from getting in too much into, the economic sort of policy issues in these countries that I'm not necessarily very familiar with. I think, but at the same time, I think, the prudential and appropriate macroeconomic management, both in the fiscal and financial side, I think that would be very, very important. And then also, keeping the stability of the currencies, and then also the pricing, the inflation. I think it is going to be very important going forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Tominaga. I think on succinct notes that Indonesia is in a good position, but of course we need to do more on the maintaining our buying power, controlling inflation, on how to make the economy keep growing for the next year. Thank you very much. We'll move further to the next session. So along with us, good morning. Good morning, Guillaume. So our second speaker already here, Mr. Guillaume de Gante. So welcome to the seminar in the Capital Markets Summit and Expo. Mr. de Gante, you already prepared a presentation. So I think, without further ado, I think I need to introduce you to the audience. Your 10 years experience in McKinsey and of course will bring you many perspectives. So and also maybe something you can share with us on how Indonesia can develop financial sectors and to sustain our economic growth. So I think yes, time is yours. Please proceed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me today. So I will share a bit what our view on the Indonesian economy is, a bit of a snapshot. And then after that, we will go through what do we see as big opportunities for Indonesia. The first point I want to make, and I think this is very much in line with what the previous speaker talked about, our economy is fundamentally a very resilient economy because it is a consumer-driven economy that has been fiscally and in terms of balance of payment, etc., quite resilient. It does not mean we are insulated, so we'll show that inflation is starting to have an impact on Indonesia, but fundamentally a resilient economy. However, there are a number of what we call mega opportunities that could enable us in Indonesia to grow even faster and to do even more. So I'll go through this quite quickly, and feel free if you have questions or so, feel free to interrupt me at any point in time. The first part is, many newspapers talked about Indonesia as being an unexpected success story in this cycle. And for many of us who have spent time here, it actually is not a surprise. The resilience of Indonesia because of relatively conservative fiscal management, because of very resilient workforce, because of very diversified economy, and because of still a lot of potential for growth, this is not a surprise. So what we see is, first of all, an overall GDP that will continue to grow faster than most other large countries, right? So going from 16 to 13 in terms of GDP size. We see the GDP composition continuing to grow towards services and continuing to evolve towards services and toward a new set of activities. We see the economy continue to be really pulled by consumer demand, right? So around 2/3 of our economy is a bit over half is driven by consumer demand, and we see financial indicators continuing to be relatively attractive, even though of course they will be impacted by the global economy. So I'll go through some of this quite quickly, and then we'll spend time on the opportunities. So first of all, we see continued growth for Indonesia. If one look at 2021 versus what we forecast for 2030, along with Oxford Economics, we see an increase in GDP by around 60%, an increase in GDP per capita by around 50%. While the population continues to grow, more the population is of working age, and urbanization continues. Right? So these are very high-level macro figures. This will put us close to top 10 globally if we continue on this trajectory. Now, our growth has been very stable, and so we project the economy to increase by around 50% between 2030 and now. Now, a lot of the composition of this growth is changing. Historically, agriculture has been a very big part of our GDP. What we see here is that the big drivers of growth come from IT, come from finance, and come from other activities such as real estate, hotel, restaurant, etc. Relatively speaking, manufacturing is going in line with GDP, and agriculture, construction, the traditional sectors of Indonesia, mining, are growing slower than the rest of GDP if one takes a long-term view. Of course, short-term, these will be driven by commodity prices, etc. The second important message is that our demographic dividend is coming to an end. So if you look at 1980, 41% of people were below the age of 14, and 56% of our population was of working age. If we look at today, 2020, it's around 68 of working age. It will be 69 in 2030. So our demographic dividend demographic situation is still strong, but the years of adding a lot of people to our working populations are gone. Right? And this has a very important implication for productivity. Because if we want to get to 5.5% growth, which has been a target of many in Indonesia, it means that the contribution of labor input, which is adding more people to the workforce, will actually get reduced quite a bit. From 1.8 to 1.4. Our growth from productivity has been healthy at 2.7, but if we want to get to 5.5% growth, it means that productivity has to grow by above 4%, which is a 50% increase versus what we have today. Right? So this is a very important message of the need to really raise productivity if we want to continue experiencing growth. And if one looks at countries like Vietnam and Thailand, they have been able to really drive in-sector productivity improvement at a very fast clip through improving supply chain, improving digitization, improving efficiency and education of workers. So that it is one thing that will be important for us, which is really substituting labor input, so the 40% you see here, by faster increase in within sector productivity improvement. Right? So that's one important message. I'll skip some of this in the interest of time. But the next thing we're going to say that we have seen an explosion, of course, in infrastructure, and I'm sure the previous speaker talked about that quite a bit. But the expenditure on infrastructure has tripled, right, in the last few years. This will be, of course, a very big contributor to continued growth in productivity, and we think this is a very important element of the Indonesian economy that will continue, and we think this will yield results over the coming few years, because infrastructure takes a lot of time to really have impact, and the stock of infrastructure is very important. So we think this will be a big element of enabling this increase in productivity of the Indonesian economy. We think also that investments will be an important part, and attractive investment will be a very big part of the Indonesian economy. Today, Singapore and Hong Kong are the largest sectors, the largest investors, as you see on the left side of this page. But a lot of the investment is in metal and mining. We think moving the share of portfolio investment to FDI, and number two, diversifying FDI into higher value add sectors will be very important for Indonesia. And many, a lot of manufacturing, we'll come back to it, manufacturing, services will be very important for FDI. We also think that continuing to focus on exports and export beyond commodities will be very important. Right? So if we now, and I'll skip a lot of this, if we take a step back to say, now, what do we see, given where we are, given this resilient economy, what do we see as big opportunities for Indonesia? Right? And this is probably the most important part of what we want to share today. We see 6 mega opportunities for Indonesia. Opportunity number 1, we can be a world leader in nature-based solution. So we can be a world leader in really driving ESG and this environmental shift. That's a big opportunity for Indonesia. We'll come back to this. Number 2 is global supply chains are being completely redesigned as we speak. Right? And everyone is moving to a China plus one or to a multi-country supply chain. I think the big and very important question for Indonesia is how can we be in the consideration set for FDI? And we'll go through this, but today 4 countries have taken the lead in being in the new supply chain. Indonesia is at the cusp, is below these 4 countries. The third big opportunity for Indonesia, in our view, is really sustain, use our very large consumer base to increase long-term domestic savings, so as we can increase the share of investment in GDP, private investment. Right? And if we think of the institutional vehicles for saving, today they're relatively small in Indonesia. So for example, BPJS has assets around $40 billion US. If one looks at the equivalent in Malaysia, it would be 200 billion, let alone in Europe or Japan or the US. So really driving fixed capital investment by increasing domestic long-term rupiah savings through pension fund, insurance, other vehicles, we think is a very big opportunity for Indonesia. The fourth opportunity is to build the best digital ecosystem in the world. Right? We have actually one of the most digital population in the world that is in many ways many years ahead of business. So getting to building those digital ecosystems that investors are ready to invest in is a very big opportunity for Indonesia. The fifth is continuing to speed up infrastructure modernization. And the sixth and last is to really drive service exports. Indonesia has many potential service offers, including tourism, many other service. So driving that service export in ASEAN, we think is a very big opportunity. So I'll be quite quick in the interest of time, but I'll talk about one or two of these. I'll talk about 2 of these. Right? The first one is sustainability. We have the second largest low-cost nature-based sequestration potential after Brazil. We can be world leader in nature-based solutions for ESG and in trading them, in developing them. We could be a real world leader in this. That's a very big opportunity for us going forward. That's a big opportunity number one. Big opportunity number two is even before the pandemic, a lot of companies were trying to move to a China plus one supply chain, to diversify supply chain. You see here FDI in China coming down and wages in China coming up. If one look at which countries are today most likely to benefit from this supply chain redistribution, right? Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam come out as very strong because they have very strong attractiveness of manufacturing. They have high competitiveness. They have high institution strength. They have good human capital. They have reasonable labor cost, and then they have a reasonable tax policy. So, and this is from CME. But if we look at Indonesia, we are at the cusp, right, of being able to benefit this. So we think a very big and important opportunity for Indonesia is to be in the consideration set for this redistribution of supply chain. And this could have massive impact in terms of driving employment, driving value added in Indonesia. So maybe I'll stop here. But for us, these are the 6 big kind of mega opportunities for Indonesia, opportunities to really boost growth going forward as well as productivity. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jom. It's very interesting. You mentioned about the number one, the natural-based solution, as the previous speaker, Mr. Torinaga, also mentioned about the ADB effort on supporting green bonds in Indonesia and also in some other countries. So I think there are some similarities here. Indonesia has the potential for environmental friendly. So you mentioned a bit about the mangrove. So how can we capitalize on this natural asset of Indonesia in order to support the carbon trade?
Yes. So it is a very good question, and again, one of the areas where Indonesia can really be a world leader. Mm-hmm. Right? So if we look at this is the kind of make of Indonesia abatement potential, right? Nature-based solution. These are economical and low-cost nature-based solution. As you can see, a lot of restoration of peatland, yes, can actually, this can get us to about half our potential. The other half of this nature-based potential would be avoided deforestation, right? And so for that, preservation of our existing forest. And building that economic potential, which IDX is doing a lot of thinking on how we can improve carbon trading, how we can create a voluntary carbon trading market. We think this would be a very important enabler of really reaping the economic benefit of this potential of Indonesia.
Okay. Well, of course, and everything will come to how we finance these opportunities, which I think will untap the potential of Indonesia. Do you have any clue on how to get the private investment, global private investment, to get involved with these initiatives?
So one of the very interesting elements, as you know, I've been here for close to 10 years.
Okay.
And on this particular topic, the world is really looking at Indonesia. On this topic, a lot of global companies, a lot of global investors are looking at Indonesia and are ready to invest. I think the quality of the projects themselves, so the sustainability and the setup of the project themselves is a very important element. I think But generally, the availability of capital for this, I think, in the context of Indonesia, is very high. So it's something we're very, very optimistic on.
Okay. Well, thank you. It's a good opportunity for IDX as well as in the Indonesian capital market, how we tap to the natural assets. It's not only about people, but also about the natural resources. So I think back to Mr. Tominaga. Okay, and again, Mr. Tominaga, I think there are similarities from ADB efforts on first controlling about the coal-fired, and then we really appreciate the initiative from ADB that we need to preserve the asset, but then also need to control the emission. So I think can I have your opinion on how Indonesia can move further in the carbon trading or using the carbon asset in Indonesia on mitigating global issues about the climate change, and how best we can approach this?
Thank you. I think the carbon trading question, by the way, I think it was very interesting presentation about the mega. I think I very much agree with many of the points that have been made, particularly a natural-based solution and infrastructure, etc., and a supply chain issue. On the carbon trading, yes, I think it is very important. I think it is for the global community to get this system right. I think there are a lot of discussion taking place at the international level and COP, and then that, UNFCCC, etc. I think the world will need to come to some kind of an agreement for this to be done internationally across the border. I think, for example, in the case of the energy transition mechanism I talked about, if there could be some extra sort of the cash flow coming in from the carbon credit, etc., I mean, that would be much easier and more bankable to retire, going towards the retirement and the repurposing of the coal-fired power plants in a more accelerated manner. It will also, of course, provide us, the resources to invest in the renewable energy. How exactly? I think Indonesia has been making an effort in this area. I think there are some efforts being done within the country. I think that should be very much implemented and encouraged with gusto and with the policy framework that allows for it. So I think there is really the area for strategically also for Indonesia, very important area to invest in many ways, both in terms of human capital and financial resources.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tominaga. So I think we can come to the conclusion that speaking about Indonesia, actually natural related is the main asset for Indonesia. It's not only about the people, but then again about the natural resources. So I think I'd like to come to you again, Jom. So you have any last closing statement on how Indonesia best to tap the potential, and what's the strategic way on doing this? Who need to be involved, whether it's the government or private sectors or donors, for example, international community? Do you have any comment on this?
So it is a very good question. By the way, we have seen the momentum that had been created by G20 around getting and B20 and E20 around getting everyone around the table to be able to really discuss this in a way that we had not seen before. So generally, I think it requires coordination. We think that private sector still has a very important role to play, to price. To get to the right pricing, to get to be able to really mobilize capital. But I think in the end it will require very strong coordination between all these efforts. And I know that IDX, you have done a lot of work on this already. But I believe beyond that, if I look at what can really make a difference for Indonesia going forward, we think that accelerating infrastructure. And we think that entering the considerations for global supply chain can be also massive opportunities for us.
Okay, thank you, Jom. So I already got the question here from Mario Iroth. So it's a question for both of the panelists. The question is, in the light of environment sustainability, managing energy resources, and ensuring economic growth, Indonesia seems to be in dilemmatic position. Shifting to renewable energy to save environment comes with soaring vegetable oil prices and eventually promote inflationary pressure here in Indonesia. Neglecting coal resources will also drag the domestic coal industry. So, is there an example of a government that can do shifting smoothly in regard to the green energy without disrupting the current situation? So you have, Mr. Tominaga, you have any experience of how we can...
Very good points. I think just a few points. One, I think, is that, you ask about examples. I think the world is in the process of turning green right now. So I think every country also have its own sort of country condition that they need to deal with. I think the path would probably be very dependent on the country context. So I think, and then Indonesia is paving its way for its own a path, which we're very much supporting. So I think that's, it's going to have to be some kind of a unique solution for each country. Secondly, I think there's some kind of an indication of the tension between the economic growth side and also the environmental sustainability side. I think we need to come up to some kind of formula that is not mutually exclusive. This new technology, new energy transition, new industry, I think that's also a very big opportunity for Indonesia and any country as a source of new sort of growth in the next generation, in the years that are coming. So that is, and then also finally, I just wanted to react a little bit on that role of the private sector in this whole thing. As I mentioned, financing is so, the size of financing is enormous. So as I mentioned, it requires the private sector coming in. It's going to have to be some kind of a blended finance kind of scheme that is required, and the carbon trading and all that sort of things also need to be coming into play. So I think there's going to be a very sort of important sort of partnership with the public and the private side in order to get these things done, given that climate change is really the number one issues that we are facing today. And then in a sense that particularly for the generations, future generations, it really, their life depends on it. So I think we really need to figure out the way forward and come up with some kind of a solution together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tominaga. And you have any opinion on how these intermediates from current our dependence, for example, cooking oil, when export the cooking oil, then the market's missing the cooking oil, and then it's also the household screaming, where's the cooking oil? And then, but then in the same time, some of our assets also has a good prospect in export, but then also mitigate. So related to the Mario questions, do you have any comment on this?
Yeah, so first of all, I don't know if it is any comfort, but Indonesia is not the only country that has a big dilemma on this. If you look at Europe today, so natural gas in Europe used to be about the same as the US, maybe slightly higher. Today, natural gas in Europe is 5 times the price of natural gas in the US. So trading, if you look at ESG, trading the E and the S, yep, and how to really manage the social impact, especially in a country like Indonesia, with the population we have. India also has had a year ago has had a lot of challenges on this. So we are in very good company in terms of trying to figure out this dilemma, and Europe is really in the middle of it now. I think one of the lessons from Europe is don't make decisions too quickly, and don't shut down sources of energy too quickly. That can be one. But I would say that if you look at so at the country level, I think everyone is trying to figure this out. But we have looked at many companies, for example, banks in Australia that have tried to really improve the scope 2 and scope 3 emissions of their lending portfolio. We think that for Indonesia, just like for Australia, the answer is less around reshaping the portfolio per se, meaning stop financing specific things, but more around building the capabilities through nature-based solutions, through technology innovation, through different processes, to really bring this energy from brown to green,
Yeah.
or to a shade of green, right? And there, again, some banks in Europe, some banks in Australia have started to build these capabilities. We think that this is probably the path for us for Indonesia. It will take time. It will be a lot of it will be ramping up our sequestration and nature-based solution, but a very big part of it will be to invest in these in technology that are cleaner and use including our financial sector to do this.
Okay, thank you, Jim. I think we're coming to the end part of our seminar, so I think I'll like to dedicate the next maybe conclusion from Mr. Tominaga and followed by you, Jim, on the current situation in Indonesia and also all over the world and how we can best manage, navigate on this headwind. Please, Mr. Tominaga.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for this opportunity. I think for Indonesia, as I mentioned, Indonesia is in a very sort of robust situation at the particular moment in time, but at the same time, downside risks are there. So I think it is a sort of appropriate sort of monitoring of the situation, very careful monitoring, and then careful sort of macroeconomic management, supervision, etc., are going to be important. In terms of the sustainability, in terms of the climate change, etc., long-term investment for the long-term goods is going to be very important. At the same time, sort of keeping the short-term economic management in an appropriate way. So I think it would be a very complicated sort of policy mix will be required, but I'm very sure that the Indonesians policymakers are capable to handle this situation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Noor. And you, Jim, do you have any conclusion, closing?
Well, so actually it will be quite similar in terms of theme, but yeah, the macro situation has not been seen for the last 40 years. Right? So the tightening of the Fed has been the fastest in 40 years, 300 bips, and the CPI 13 hours ago. The CPI for September came out, as we also at 8.2, way ahead of expectations. They started down from 8.3 months before, but not very far from the 2% that the Fed was targeting. So the global macro uncertainties are higher than they have ever been. But the very good news is that we have gone from being one of the fragile five to being the envy of, maybe not the envy of the world, but the envy of most of the world in terms of economic resilience. And this is because of a lot of the investment in infrastructure, about a very prudent fiscal management around some luck with our nature and with our population. So we are the envy of the world, and we are very optimistic long-term on Indonesia, but we're also quite optimistic short-term on Indonesia as well relative to other countries. And we think a lot of these opportunities are very realistic. Many countries would like to have a macroeconomic situation, but they would also like to have as many opportunities in front of us as we do.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Gigantes. Your closing remarks are eye-opening for us, and also Mr. Tominaga. Thank you very much for the closing remarks. I think, in short, I can conclude that even though the headwind is still there, the perfect storm from many sides is still there. So, and for next future, I think everybody needs to hold on and then keep going. But then Indonesia is in a better position compared to other countries. So I think the question is how we can manage on this all of our assets and how we can navigate the things that's already on hand. So by this statement, I think I'd like to close our first seminar on the second day of Capital Market Summit and Expo. Thank you very much, Mr. Tominaga. Thank you very much, Mr. Decante. So I think I'll back to MC. Come to you, Valentina.
Thank you so much, Pak Poltak. For wrapping up the session, it is indeed an interesting discussion. So Indonesia is still a very attractive place to invest. We can be optimistic about the future, yet still we need to be cautious and make more efforts to mobilize capital. I hope all the viewers who are following this webinar find today's discussion insightful for making smart investment decisions in the future. So once again, thank you to our moderator and speakers who have spared their time to be with us, and also to all of our viewers for making time in your busy schedules to join us here. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached to the end of our first webinar. I wish you all a pleasant day. Don't forget to join in the next webinar at 1:30 p.m. with another interesting topic regarding Sharia ESG-based stock index. Stay safe and healthy, everyone, and see you next time. The rest of the webinar will be led by Ilham. Ilham, back to you.
Terima kasih kepada Ibu Valentina Simon yang membuka sesi pertama pada hari kedua CMSE 2022 ini. Dan juga kepada Bapak Poltak Hotradero yang telah memimpin jalannya diskusi webinar internasional yang baru saja kita saksikan bersama. Halo investor cerdas, Sobat CMSE. Kembali lagi bersama saya Ilham Kalalak. Kita baru saja menyaksikan sesi webinar internasional yang menghadirkan pembicara institusi global yang tentunya memberikan insight yang menarik. Apa peluang dan tantangan yang dihadapi Indonesia di tengah berbagai isu global, terutama sektor finansial dan pasar modal, serta bagaimana Indonesia bisa memanfaatkan keunggulan tidak hanya untuk berkembang, tetapi juga tumbuh berkelanjutan. Pada hari kedua pelaksanaan CMSE 2022 ini, Sobat CMSE masih akan disuguhi topik-topik seminar lainnya yang akan kami hadirkan ke hadapan Anda. Namun kembali saya mengingatkan bahwa pada pukul 13.30 waktu Indonesia bagian Barat nanti akan ada seminar dengan topik yang sangat menarik, yaitu indeks saham berbasis ESG Syariah sebagai solusi kebutuhan investor di pasar modal. Dengan menghadirkan narasumber hebat lainnya, tentunya sangat menarik untuk kita ikuti bersama. Dan sebentar lagi akan ada sesi pengundian door prize dilanjutkan pada pukul 1 dan 15 atau jam 3 sore nanti, jadi jangan lewatkan. Namun sebelumnya saya ingin mengajak kembali kepada Anda semuanya untuk sama-sama mengunjungi dua booth di CMSE 2022 ini. Yang pertama, kita akan menuju ke booth dari PT CGS CIMB Sekuritas Indonesia. Halo, selamat pagi.
Halo, selamat pagi Bapak Ilham.
Hai, selamat pagi. Dengan kakak siapakah ini?
Oh, saya dengan Tasya. Halo.
Hai, selamat pagi Kak
Semua
Tasya. Kak Tasya ini
CMSE
dari
juga selamat siang ya. Selamat pagi ya, sorry.
Selamat pagi menuju siang.
Iya.
Kak Tasya ini dari PT CGS CIMB Sekuritas Indonesia. Boleh dijelaskan Kak, selama rangkaian dari CMSE 2022 ini ada apa aja dari booth yang ada di booth PT CGS CIMB Sekuritas?
Iya, jadi Bapak Ibu semua jangan lupa berkunjung ke virtual booth CJCMB ya, karena kita lagi ada promo, yaitu promo Lucky 500, di mana 500 orang pertama yang membuka rekening efek di CJCMB akan mendapatkan voucher investasi sebesar Rp100.000. Dan nggak sampai situ aja, jadi kalau misalnya Bapak Ibu semua ikutan acara edukasi kita, yaitu pasti paham investasi untuk umum ya, yang mana sekarang juga sedang berlangsung nih di booth CJCMB kita. Bisa langsung bergabung aja. Kalau misalnya Bapak Ibu bergabung, nanti akan mendapatkan tambahan voucher investasi lagi sebesar Rp100.000 lagi nih Bapak Ibu semua. Dan juga khusus untuk bulan Oktober ini yang merupakan bulan inklusi keuangan, kita ada Gen Z Challenge ya, yang mana kalau ada Bapak Ibu semua di sini yang suka membuat Reels Instagram atau TikTok yang temanya nanti tentang investasi ya. Nanti kita akan pilih 8 orang pemenang yang mendapatkan masing-masing Rp300.000. Jadi udah ada banyak banget nih untuk promo-promo dan juga bonus di virtual booth CGSCMB selama bulan inklusi keuangan Oktober ini, Pak Ilham. Dan juga
Seru
untuk
banget. Jadi kalau
edukasi kita,
Aha,
oh ya,
ya. Silakan Mbak lanjut.
untuk edukasi kita selain dari ini kan lagi berlangsung nih edukasinya sampai jam 12 nanti bisa langsung gabung aja di virtual booth kita. Dan besok juga akan ada lagi untuk edukasi pasti fund investasinya
Oke.
dari jam 10 sampai jam 1 siang. Jadi Bapak Ibu pengunjung sini bisa ikut pasti fund investasi kami, kemudian membuka rekening efek dan mendapatkan voucher investasi dari kami gitu, Pak Ilham.
Wow, berarti banyak banget nih ya hadiah yang diberikan dari PT CGS ya MB Sekuritas. Salah satunya mungkin yang suka bikin konten Instagram seperti saya. Bisa dapat hadiah masing-masing Rp300.000 ya Mbak ya?
Iya betul Pak Ilham. Jadi nanti bikin kontennya di Reels Instagram atau TikTok. Temanya tentang menebus impian masa depan dan kaitannya dengan investasi ya. Nanti tag ke Instagram CGSCIMBID dan kalau mau tahu lebih lanjut itu info lengkapnya ada di website kita di www.cgs-kimb.co.id. Pak Ilham juga bisa ikutan kalau mau ya.
Bisa. Boleh ya, aku ikutan boleh ya. Tapi tetap nanti
banget.
semuanya akan dipilih siapa yang paling bagus Reels Instagramnya. Buat Anda juga yang penasaran syaratnya apa, caranya gimana, bisa kunjungi langsung Instagramnya. Itu ada tuh di belakang Mbak Tasya, ada tuh Instagramnya.
Ya, betul ini ya.
CGSCIMBID.
Salah ya.
Sebelah kanan, kiri.
Susah.
Oke, kalau gitu terima kasih ya Mbak atas waktunya. Thank you so much juga, banyak sekali hadiah yang diberikan. Sama-sama, semoga sehat juga selalu. Bye Mbak.
Dadah.
Nah, itu tadi booth dari PT CGS YMB Sekuritas Indonesia. Sekarang aku mau berkunjung lagi ke booth selanjutnya, yaitu dari PT KAF Sekuritas Indonesia. Halo. Selamat pagi menuju siang dari booth PT KAF Sekuritas Indonesia. Hai.
Oh, selamat siang Pak.
Selamat siang. Dengan siapa ini?
Dengan Maulida dari Customer Service KAF
Hai
Sekuritas
Maulida.
Indonesia. Ya, halo Pak.
Sehat ya Kak Maulida?
Ya.
Oke, Kak Maulida boleh dijelaskan dari PT KAF Sekuritas Indonesia dalam rangkaian CMSE 2022 ini ada apa aja nih? Dan kenapa seluruh rekan-rekan yang sudah hadir di CMSE 2022 ini harus banget hadir ke booth dari PT KAF Sekuritas Indonesia?
Sebelumnya saya ingin mengucapkan terima kasih juga, terlebih dahulu untuk bursa yang telah memberi kesempatan ini. Di KAF Sekuritas saat ini telah sedang mengadakan beberapa promo, yaitu untuk yang membuka akun pada periode CMSE akan mendapatkan apresiasi saldo senilai Rp150.000 dengan syarat dan ketentuan yang berlaku. Dan untuk beberapa kuis kita ada hadiah senilai Rp300.000 untuk juara pertama dan Rp200.000 untuk juara kedua. Itu bisa dilihat di panel sebelah kiri kami. Itu bisa langsung diklik, nanti ada 2 kuis yang bisa diikuti oleh peserta. Lalu untuk di program Zoom kita itu hari ini ada live thread. Live thread itu nanti masih dilanjutkan sampai sesi 2, itu bisa diikuti oleh semua pengunjung booth kami. Kemudian besok itu di hari Sabtu kita ada Zoom mengenai edukasi pasar modal bersama Ibu Juliantika dan Ibu Nindya di jam 9:30 sampai jam 11, Pak. Jadi itu bisa bergabung bagi para peserta. Kemudian untuk beberapa program edutainment kami itu bisa dicek update-nya di Instagram kami, dan Bapak Ibu bisa memfollow media sosial kami di TikTok dan di Instagram. Gitu, Pak.
Oke. Ada lagi Mbak yang lain? Ini banyak
Untuk
juga hadiahnya ya.
webinar, untuk webinar kami juga ada beberapa kuis di sesi akhir dan ada hadiahnya, Pak.
Oke.
Totalnya 2 juta rupiah di webinar itu. Iya.
Wow, totalnya 2 juta rupiah kalau join webinar di PT Kaf
Iya.
Sekuritas Indonesia di rangkaian CMS ini ya Mbak ya.
Iya, Pak.
Oke, siap. Kalau begitu terima kasih loh Mbak. Apa ada lagi yang mau disampaikan atau sudah?
Sudah, Pak.
Sudah semua ya? Oke, kalau gitu jangan
Iya.
lupa untuk seluruh Sobat CMSE untuk langsung datang ke booth dari PT Kaf Sekuritas Indonesia. Terima kasih ya Mbak.
Iya,
Dadah.
Pak.
Selamat
Iya.
siang. Dan demikianlah kunjungan kita ke dua booth CMSE 2022 ini. Sebagai informasi, dalam CMSE 2022 ini terdapat 10 klaster booth dengan total 130 booth yang dapat Sobat CMSE kunjungi secara virtual. Adapun para peserta booth juga menyediakan berbagai gimmick menarik. Di antaranya adalah dari PT Korea Investment dan Sekuritas Indonesia memberikan promo registrasi dan pembukaan rekening selama CMSE akan mendapatkan 1 lot ETF. Wow! Dan juga dari Investasiku atau dari PT Mega Capital Sekuritas, kunjungi booth Investasiku dan ikuti webinar dengan trading ideas. Karena akan ada banyak hadiah voucher dengan total senilai 1 juta rupiah. Selanjutnya juga ada dari PT Inovasi Finansial Teknologi Makmur. Apabila Anda mengunjungi booth tersebut, kamu bisa mendapatkan bonus investasi hingga Samsung Flip dan bonus puluhan juta lainnya. Jadi langsung kunjungi dan transaksi di booth Makmur. Kapan lagi investasi reksadana dapat bonusnya banyak. Wow, dia bisa dapat Samsung Flip guys. Jadi langsung aja menuju ke booth-nya ya. Investor cerdas, Sobat CMSE, beberapa informasi terkait door prize akan aku sampaikan